Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. You are watching Women's View here on Ahlul Bayt TV. First and foremost, my condolences to all of you and the Imam of our time on these tragic days of the martyrdom of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. Inshallah, today we've got a very relevant topic lined up, and that is the topic of the contributions of Lady Fatima to society. And in particular, we want to focus a bit on her activeness in terms of the political atmosphere that she was surrounded by, and basically the social role that she took on as a woman and as a Muslim woman and as an example to us all. Without further ado, my guest is Sister Huda Jaffer. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Alaikum salam.
This is such a huge topic and such a relevant topic, and it's interesting to kind of look at the stances that Fatima Zahra took and the roles that she took on in society, and kind of not draw comparison, but kind of see the contrast between the role she took on and the role that is perhaps being promoted for women today. But to begin with, one of the people that praised her a lot was her father, Rasulullah, peace be upon him. And so I guess it's important to kind of explore what the Prophet had said about Fatima Zahra and the status that she held for him.
In history, there are many statements that the Holy Prophet has narrated in regards to his daughter. We've got from the beginning where he said about her fragrance being a fragrance of paradise, her closeness to him, and there are the comparison of her being the best women, her being one of the four best women.
Yeah.
We've got, as well as Sayyidah Fatima, we have Hazrat Khadija, we have Hazrat Maryam, and Hazrat Asya.
Yeah.
But Sayyidah Fatima, she is known to be the best of women from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we'll delve into this a bit later on, but even the titles that she was given by the Prophet were also titles that, no other women had been given in history. One of the kind of I guess one of the starting points for our discussion is how aware she was of the whereabouts of the Prophet, of kind of what was going on, the political situation, the situation of the Muslims, even to the extent where she also knew about the nature of the people that the Prophet was surrounded by. And I mean, would you be able to kind of maybe give us a bit of insight into what kind of actions and how she demonstrated this awareness?
From the beginning, the fact that Sayyidah Fatima, when she was asked about her proposals, which is, it just goes to show that this is how it should be. The girl should be asked, and for her to have been asked about the proposals that came for her, this also goes to show that, she knew the people of the time.
Mm-hmm.
She knew the way they treated the Prophet. She was aware of the situation of the time of Makkah.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I personally find that Fatima Zahra and Imam Ali and Ahlul Bayt in general, they kind of have these characteristics where, for example, the modesty of Fatima Zahra, because she was so modest, a lot of people might assume that because of that modesty she was kind of shut off from society. She probably wasn't aware of what was going on, and they wouldn't expect her to, for example, reject a proposal because she knows what a person is like. But on the contrary, like you said, she was very much aware. She was very well informed. She had these antithetical qualities, maybe you could put it that way, because, for example, in today's world, if you see someone that's very modest, you might couple that with shyness, and then that kind of makes you think, okay, this person's, you know, very much in their own bubble. They kind of, they're not very aware of what's going on in society. Whereas Fatima Zahra struck that perfect balance, and she, I mean, Ahl Bayt did everything in moderation, but she struck that balance where she was modest, but she also was very aware, and she, you know, her qualities didn't really negate other qualities, if that makes any sense. I don't know if you'd agree.
And also, it's narrated that at the time of the Battle of Uhud, she was even there. She was there when they came back from the trenches, and you know, she went to the Prophet to nurse his wounds. She was not somebody who was, you know, stayed back home. She was one of those active women who actually went to the battle.
I get, you know, this particular narration, I don't think it's one that people hear very often, because a lot of the time people have this image that Fatima Zahra, you know, she stayed at home, and of course when she did stay at home, she stayed at home, but I mean, it just goes to show that when the opportunity was right for her to go and take part in certain activities, or to go out of the house, or to, you know, assume certain roles, then she did. And it wasn't kind of one role for her whole life. As the situation changed, she acted appropriately as well. One of the other things that I think you kind of touched on this at the beginning of the show, but also something that, you know, a lot of the viewers might also be aware. One of the very famous titles of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam is Abiha, which is the mother of her father. So I was wondering if you could maybe give us insight into how she gained that title.
Sayyidah Fatima has all of these qualities where she, you know, her way of living, her actions, and more of the way she lived with her father, from the narrations and from this, like, you know, what we hear and from what the scholars have said, the way the relationship was with her father, it was so close that, you know, the bond was such that it was like he loved her and respected her so much that this is why he called her the mother of her father.
Yeah.
You know, the way, even though she was already the mother of her children, he had this respect and this whole, you know, not only was she called the mother of her father, she's also called al-Aimma, the mother of all the imams, all the Aimma. And it just makes one realize that she's the mother of the Aimma, she's the mother of the Prophet, she's also our mother.
It's interesting that you mention, because these titles specifically, they call her the mother of, for example, the Imam's the mother of her father, and I guess it's relevant to kind of bring in the climate that she was born in, and the climate that the Prophet lived in was one where females were kind of looked down upon. They weren't really seen as an asset to a family, but more of a burden. And you know, subhanAllah, it's really interesting how, because, for example, perhaps one of the reasons that females weren't really valued back in the day, in those times, was because they might not continue the family name. And now, if we look at, and in contrast, if we look at the titles of Fatima Zahra, we identify her by her progeny, we identify her by the very name that she did carry forward. So I find that quite, you know, it's pretty amazing seeing the contrast of...
I agree, because, you know, you hear the whole stories about how, you know, the fathers would wait in the pit of the grave for the mother to give birth, and if they found out it was a son, you know, they'd come out with the child, but if they found out it was a baby girl, you know, for them it was, you know, it was like an atrocity. It was something that's like so bad and a burden upon the family that they would, you know, feel that this is, you know, it's too shameful to even bring the child out. So, you know, to even like know that after the Prophet was called, he was called Abdar, he was told, you don't have somebody to, lead after you, somebody to inherit after you. But with this, it brings, there's a new respect for women that Sayyidah Fatima actually brought.
Yeah.
And not only that, she did have those titles also. And for us to know that all the Imams, they're from her, they're from the daughter of the Prophet. It just elevates the status of women in Islam even more.
Definitely. Just kind of backtracking a little, I'm curious to know, we kind of touched on the possibilities of why women were so undervalued during those times, but were there specific reasons why they didn't want to, have baby girls in the family?
I think it goes with the fact that, when you have a son, then they have your name, they carry your name.
Yeah.
And even though there were personalities such as, Hazrat Khadija, she was somebody who was very politically aware. She was somebody who led her family business. She was into merchancy. However, still at the time, it was looked down upon, and to have a son was something, it's regarded as to be of a higher status even.
Yeah, so I guess it was a sense of pride.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned Sayyidah Khadija's kind of very prominent role in society, and I guess she's also a prime example of, someone who was very well known in society, someone who accomplished a lot in society, and yet she also maintained an immaculate level of modesty.
I agree. Because the way, we realize that Sayyidah Fatima, she's Hazrat Khadija's daughter, so, she must have taken these qualities from her mother also, the way to, she was somebody who was very active within the society. That's one of the ways how the Prophet and Hazrat Khadija were married, her active role brought this about.
Definitely. One of the, we've mentioned one title, but one of the other titles of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam was Muhadditha. And in terms of, for example, education as well, perhaps you could almost say only recently, and I don't mean recently in the last few years, but it hasn't always been of such importance to get a female educated as it has been a male. And if we go back in history, Fatima Zahra, one of her titles was Muhadditha, which again, in terms of society, and we talk about education, it again puts a lot of emphasis on that.
It's really interesting how this is one of her names, Muhadditha, Hadith, the speaker, somebody who, narrates. And it's interesting how it's for us, it's a lesson for us that, we're not to sit back, we are to, come forward in society. And the way Sayyidah Fatima, her khutbah, Sayyidah Zainab, her khutbah, and then this is how, us women can actually learn from them. The amount of detail in the khutbah, from praising Allah to, acknowledging her status. Before her status, she acknowledges the Prophet, obviously. And then, she asks the society, will you be quiet? And in a way, it makes us think that we're also living in a society where, there's a lot of injustice going on. There's a lot of oppression, and what are we doing? Are we really standing up in the way we can stand?
Yeah, definitely. In terms of, her sermon is obviously very powerful, and I'm sure the viewers at home, there are so many recitations of her sermon on YouTube, and, it's very easy to find. But this idea of speaking out against injustice is something that kind of ran throughout Ahl Bayt, be it Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, Fatima Zahra, And once again, it just goes to kind of emphasize that responsibility almost, because I hear this quite a lot when we talk about Fatima Zahra and the fact that she spoke out. One of the things that you hear often with that is Fatima Zahra had to speak out. She only spoke because she was in a position where she couldn't do anything else but to speak out. And in a way, it kind of makes us realize that there are times when perhaps we even have responsibility to speak out. Do you think sometimes maybe, as females, Muslim females, part of a community, do you think sometimes perhaps we kind of shy away from taking a bit of not a front line, but, assuming this responsibility to speak out against certain things?
I do. I really do. And not just that, to be able to speak out, you've got to learn first. And, we've got so many hawzas. We've got hawzas in London. You've got, I myself, going to Iran was something, it was a chance to learn, to, gain that confidence, a chance to not just speak out, but speak for myself in society. Before there was a time when I thought it was the norm to do what everybody else was doing, And then it's like that change to go to Hawza and to actually understand what your religion really is. I mean, we don't all need to go to Hawza, there are scholars here, there are books we can read. And that's the thing, we need to read.
Yeah.
The fact that we have all of these, for us to know the Islamic laws that have been set for us, for us to, follow the akhlaq and teach the akhlaq, to know the history, to also, correct one's belief. That's what they taught us. When they talk about, in their sermons, they taught us to, how to believe. But it's that thing, these things, we don't go and open them, we don't decide to read them. But in many hawzas, to study aqaid, they open the sermon in Fadaq.
Yeah.
They open that sermon and teach from it. It's one of those things that the men are doing. They are going and learning. Okay,
Yeah.
maybe not all, but I feel
more
like
than-
women shy away.
Yeah.
And we feel like it's not our responsibility, but it really is. When we believe it is our responsibility, that's when we can actually act upon it. That's when
Yeah.
we can make a change in society.
Definitely. Why, do you think there's anything specific kind of holding females back from acknowledging the responsibility? Because, we live in the 21st century. Most, if not all the females I know have, make an effort to gain some kind of formal secular education. But when it comes to, for example, Islamic studies, we kind of take a back seat. And I'm no expert in this area, so I don't know why, but...
In my opinion, I think it's because it's not emphasized enough. We do have madrasas, but how much can one learn? You go at such a young age, and then there's a stop, and that's it, and then you're just, you're told, read the Quran. But sometimes we have the youngsters who, they can't read. And, from personal experience, I could say it's because sometimes you feel like, oh, I don't know how to do this. So, I feel like if I don't know how to do it, then I can't do it. Personally, I wasn't somebody who was able to pick up quite easily. I found tajweed really hard. I found it, I loved to recite, but I felt like, wait a second, I don't recite properly, so, it's not for me. I'll give somebody else a chance. But then it's the whole beauty of when you actually go and do something, when you actually learn how to do it. There's so much...
satisfaction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's satisfaction in doing that. And not just that, studying as well. If we go and open the books, if we go and study, we put these, the setbacks aside that we don't have time, and, we need to prioritize. We think, work and, like other activities, yeah, it's amazing to do sports. It's really good if you can work as well. But, just to give a bit of time to actually, sit down and just maybe do a bit of tafsir or study into aqaid, these things that, we don't get the chance to do as, as women. Like, I feel like, especially living in the West, I felt like I needed that push when I went to Hawza. It was like, this is the way to do it. And I feel like you gain so much more, and it brings more inner peace within your life as well when you know that everything you're doing, it's for the pleasure of Allah. It's, I'm not saying that, I studied for very long, but just studying, it brings satisfaction within itself.
It was brilliant hearing about your experience. Sounds really, really amazing. I guess in a way you're almost, attempting to follow in the footsteps of Fatima Zahra, because if we look at a more community-based role that she took on, if I'm not mistaken, she used to teach the women of the community. So for example, Rasulullah would teach the men, about, for example, how to pray, and Fatima Zahra, kind of took that responsibility on for the women. And again, like you said, we kind of tend to lag behind in that nowadays, kind of tend to take a back seat and leave it up to the men. And we kind of forget that, hang on, it's a 50-50, there are males and females in this community, and some things perhaps seem better coming from women. Sometimes maybe it's better to be taught by someone to whom you can relate a bit better. Moving on to a more political role that Fatima Zahra took on, one of the highlights in her life was Mubahala. And again, this was one of the instances where she took on that role of, you could say, being an ambassador for the religion. Rasulullah took, as a lot of our viewers might be aware, took Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, Imam Ali, and to represent our women, as it's quoted, he took Fatima Zahra. And
isn't it amazing how he took one woman,
yeah,
just to represent the women? There was just the need for one woman, and it just goes to say, like, for Mubahala to have taken place, there was only need of one woman, even though now, how it is, even like inheritance, and many other things, men are given the higher role, you need two women, but you need one man.
Mm-hmm.
So it just goes to show, like, here, there was only need for one woman. It just elevates the status of Sayyidah Fatima even more.
Definitely. In terms, what can we take from that? Because, we've kind of emphasized how much we're possibly lagging behind the males of the community. What specific lessons do we take from Mubahala so that we can perhaps be a bit more active in our day-to-day lives?
I feel like from Mubahala, even though there wasn't, on the spoken side, it was more of a portrayal. So even though, as women, we might not need to speak everywhere, but just to be there and, attending these, we have so many marches, protests, we have other places where women can just show their support, be active, and mostly just to know about what's going on. Isn't that like the most important for us to, be aware of, like, what's actually happening in the time that we're living in?
Definitely.
And that's another thing we can actually take from them, to actually be aware of the news. Tell myself this first, because I feel like I need to do it more as well.
I'm terrible. I completely agree. I know this is very cliche, but I often hear friends complaining that, for example, when there's a family gathering, there's always this very interesting conversation that the males are having about current issues, current affairs, what's happening around the world, what's happening around the news, and then on the female side, it's, completely unrelated. And, like you said, we do need to be aware. It's very, very, very important.
I think it's because we tend to ignore it.
Yeah.
We feel like, what happened yesterday was more important, or, it's like it doesn't come up that often. Like, I don't know if we don't see it as a priority.
Yeah.
But it goes to show that, like, we need to do more.
Definitely, definitely. It is time for a short break, dear viewers, so we will see you in a few minutes. Don't go away. We'll see you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. You're watching Women's View here on Ahl Bayt TV. For those of you who have just tuned in, we are commemorating the days of the martyrdom, or the days leading up to the martyrdom of the Lady of Light, Fatima Zahra alayha salam. And today we have a very relevant topic. We have a topic that I'm sure all of us can relate to, and that is the contributions of Fatima Zahra alayha salam to society and the lessons we can take from that. Our wonderful guest today is Sister Huda Jaffer. Thank you so much for joining me. Prior to the break, we covered quite a bit. We spoke about Fatima Zahra's status with her father. We talked about how well-versed and aware, and particularly politically aware, Fatima Zahra was in comparison to maybe our lack of political awareness today. Also, we've spoken about a few titles of hers, her presence at Mubahala, and Fatima Zahra, needless to say, in every quality, in every aspect of her life, she excelled beyond comprehension. But as we mentioned during the break, there are other women, for example, we mentioned Sayyidah Khadija quite a bit, but there are other women who we can also take lessons from. We mentioned Sayyidah Khadija, but we spoke about Sayyidah Zainab a bit, even the four women that you mentioned at the beginning, Asiya alayhi salam, Maryam, yeah. So despite having so many other female role models, all of whom are amazing, and all of whom possess qualities that we aspire to achieve one day, Fatima Zahra is still given the title of Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen, or the Mistress of the Women of the Worlds. And a lot of people might ask why, because what sets Fatima Zahra apart from all these other amazing women who have been mentioned?
I think it begins from her, her qualities, from her teachings, what she took from her mother, from Hazrat Khadija, Hazrat Khadija gave her teachings to her daughter, but her daughter was one that, she not only took from Hazrat Khadija, but also from the Prophet. The Prophet, the best creation created. She learnt from the Prophet, and not just that, she taught her teachings to her children. She had a very short life, as we all know, but within those 18 years, she was able to gain so much and also do so much and teach even more. She wasn't one who, sat back. She was one who was so active, and from what she knew, you could say that she never did anything that would upset the Prophet. She always had a caring role for him, and even after his death, it upset her to the extent that, she was struck with grief. And it's understandable that even as we have Sayyidah Maryam, we have Sayyidah Khadija, we have Sayyidah Asiya, and not just them, we have Sayyidah Nargis Khatun, we have, these, the mothers of the Imams, the mother of our 12th Imam. And, to know that she's the mother of them all, she's the mother of all the Imams. The Imams have such qualities, we learn from their lives the way they carried themselves, the way they handled every situation with patience, with always teaching. And from that, if we look back and just, think, how are they who they are?
Yeah.
So how did they achieve these qualities? So when we realize that Sayyidah Fatima has given these to her children, then, without a doubt, we know that, she's the best woman. She's the best woman from the beginning till the end, from those before her and those after her.
Definitely. Again, just emphasizing what you said, it really is amazing because, again, if you contrast to what society thought of women prior to her, in terms of, for example, females didn't really carry a name forward, females didn't represent much, or didn't represent their family, whereas males did. And again, like I said prior to the break, it's quite amazing that Fatima Zahra is identified by her progeny, even though she's the female and she's not the son of the Prophet, she's the daughter of the Prophet. So that's, something that strikes me quite powerfully. One of the qualities, or one of the aspects of Fatima Zahra's life that stands out quite a lot is her sacrifices. And not just in terms of, for her family, but again, even for society. So, for example, her wedding night, yeah.
This, you hear this and you think, how? Like, it just amazes you, to think that Sayyidah Fatima was one who, the night of her wedding, she had a beautiful outfit. You can imagine the Holy Prophet's daughter. Yet when a needy person comes to the door asking for something, she remembers what Allah has said, that give from what you love. And she gives this, just that selfless act. Not just this, Hazrat Ali once, when she was ill, he went to get her some food. And on his way, he encountered with a poor lady who, asked him for some food. He, without thinking, this is the way they were, he gave half of the pomegranate he had. And when he returned to the Holy Lady, she didn't ask him, she didn't complain. She didn't say, why have you only bought half? Then he asked her, won't you ask? That's, it just makes you realize that even the time when they were doing iftar, when they had been fasting, they still, the family of the Ahlul Bayt, they gave the loaf of bread. Something that, it's the best that they had. This is what we can learn from them.
Yeah.
These are the qualities that they taught us to have.
Definitely. I mean, just sometimes when we think we're making sacrifices, often it's kind of, either sometimes we might do it kind of half-heartedly, like a bit of you inside kind of breaks because you like an item so much, or you are attached to wealth so much. And it's interesting, for example, on her wedding night, the verse that she said she did obey, was saying, you will not achieve righteousness until you're willing to give away from that which you love. And I guess there's a difference between giving something and being willing to give something.
With sincerity and khulus.
Yeah. I mean, now, for example, if we look at our everyday situation, sometimes, for example, just today, I was walking to the station and there are these people with like buckets collecting for charity, and sometimes we might give out of embarrassment because everyone else is giving, or sometimes you might give because they won't leave you alone, or basically sometimes we give but we forget the aspect of sincerity is crucial and vital, and it makes such a difference to our deeds.
It's interesting how sometimes when it's happened that you've missed the opportunity, but you turn back and you think, Allah, please, let me do something for you. I know I might have missed it, and it amazes you how sometimes that opportunity is given to you again, and I guess we really should learn from it, to give to give with our heart, to give with that khulus, that you're not expecting anything back, because why should you expect from the people when you have Allah? It's like sometimes we end up thinking so much about the way we'll do things, the way our journey will go, but when you realize that nothing is in your hands, this is what the Ahlul Bayt taught us.
Definitely. We've spoken about sacrifice, we've spoken about her rank above all the other female role models that we've mentioned tonight. But with the days leading up to her martyrdom, one of the key highlights or incidences was the fact that Fadak was usurped from her, and then she kind of took a stand. She took a stand, and she fought for her rights. And I mean, if we read into the details, it's really, really, it's not surprising, but it's remarkable, and it's amazing that Fatima Zahra was very, very, very aware of the situation. She was very aware of her rights. She was very aware of who she was dealing with. And again, if we do read the details when she talks about inheritance, etc., it's very apparent that she was extremely well versed in the situation, and the Quran and Islamic rulings, etc. So
it teaches us that not only was she knowledgeable, she asked the people first, after praising Allah, after praising the Prophet, after acknowledging her status, after telling them, I am the daughter of the Prophet, then she questions them. She asks them, where have you put the Quran? The book of Allah, the guidance that He sent you. When it tells us that Sulaiman inherited Dawood, when we have in Surah Maryam where Prophet Zakaria was asking for an heir. And from this, it just goes to show that her knowledge of the Quran was so deep. The fact that Prophet Zakaria, being a prophet at the age of 90, he didn't want his wealth to go to the cousins. He asks Allah for an heir so that his wealth would go to his own. And then she questions the people, am I not the daughter? She knows that the daughter gets 1/3 and the son has the right to 2/3. She has this knowledge, but she still explains that this is, how can every other prophet give their wealth, but the holy prophet not have any wealth for his daughter?
Yeah.
She stands up, and it's not just about asking for something, it's about standing up for your rights. It goes to show us that to make a stand where it is your right to, we've also got other Islamic rulings of standing up against oppression, not to sit back and whether it be a woman or a man. But from this, it just reiterates the fact that women also have a stand, and they weren't women who would sit back and just let their right be taken away.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, I can't, you know, I find it so amazing how, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, how Fatima Zahra, she maintained this immaculate level of modesty. And prior to the break, we kind of touched on it, we didn't get to elaborate on it, but you said that despite this modesty, she still had these interactions and she still engaged and dealt with members of society. For example, FEDEC, for example, I think we haven't mentioned in the show Bilal yet, but she had these interactions, but it just goes to show in what way she must have had these interactions for her to maintain her modesty and yet have such a powerful presence amongst these people.
You know, as well as these, we have Hazrat Salman, where he would come to ask her questions, and you know, she would answer those questions as well as maintaining her modesty. Hazrat Bilal, she asked him to recite the adhan, and even though she was, you know, she was struck with grief, and she, you know, she fell apart at the name of the Prophet. However, you know, Hazrat Bilal wanted to respect her by not carrying on. However, she felt it would be an honor for him to carry on. You know, she actually requested him. And not just this, there was the way Hazrat Fatima, she, you know, even the time when we hear the story about the blind man, you know, that man is blind. Yet she shows us that modesty, you know, it's not just about your covering, you know. Sometimes we feel like, you know, oh, I'm wearing a scarf and, you know, that's it, that's hijab. Like, the meaning of hijab was, you know, it's changed now. But she shows us that, you know, she doesn't need to wear a hijab in front of, you know, this blind person. Yet she wants to keep her modesty. She wants to teach us that, you know, it's also, you know, she can see him, you know. It's that presence. And the way, you know, Allah has told us, she's teaching us how to do it.
Yeah, definitely. I guess, I mean, with respect to hijab, with respect to the way in which Fatima Zahra fought for her rights and she, you know, demanded her rights, I guess the underlying kind of, not theme, but the underlying quality perhaps is that Fatima Zahra had kind of acknowledged her own value as a human being. And I don't mean that in a way where, you know, in a way of arrogance or kind of look at me, I'm so important, but in terms of self-respect. I know a lot of people, I mean, I hear this quite, especially recently, I've had quite a few people say, and it's a very cliche or very common phrase, where people say, you won't get respect from other people unless you respect yourself. When we look at Fatima Zahra, she did, you know, she had that sense of honor. Perhaps honor is a better word. She had that sense of honor where she realized, you know, her standing within society. In the sermon, she also, you know, she acknowledges her status. She's the daughter of the Prophet. And in light of this, she then acknowledges her rights and what she's owed and, you know, the way she's been wronged. So I guess sometimes, for example, Christianity, for example, you could say there's this notion of kind of being very passive. So, you know, if someone slaps you on one cheek, you turn the other cheek. And Islam is different from that in terms, you know, Islam is about having that respect to yourself, not verging on arrogance, but just, you know, value yourself as a human being. And Fatima Zahra clearly did that. FEDEC is, I mean, there's so much more to we could say with regards to FEDEC. We haven't got that long.
You know, another thing that we can learn from FEDEC, it's not just Sayyidah Fatima doing
Yeah.
this speech. Sayyidah Zainab lives according to the speech.
Yeah.
You know, her way of living, her talking in the courtyard of Yazid, her, you know, just the way she carried herself. You know, it's like she used the sermon at Fadak as, you know, as her guide. You know, it's like the honor that her mother gave her was given to her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she took that and became the person she became the, you know, the respected woman.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like the way you said, you know, Sayyidah Fatima, the honor, the respect, you know, her respect, she did have that self-respect, but it was nothing in the eyes of the respect of Allah, you know? It was just like we said about the dress that she gave away, just like we said about how she, you know, put the needy first. She did respect herself, she did have a self-respect. And, you know, it was used in such a way that, you know, if there was a beggar at the door, or, you know, the way when the Prophet had even said to Imam Ali that, you know, I'm coming over for dinner. Imam Ali knows there's no food in the house, yet he goes to Sayyidah Fatima. And who does she ask? She raises her hands and asks Allah. Angel Jibreel brings food. You know, this is her status, this is her self-respect, that she asks only of Allah. And, you know, it's such a big lesson for us that, you know, we do need to respect ourselves. And not just that, you know, we've got so many women in society, you know, so many influential women. We have women who have been, you know, queens and warriors. You've got, you know, disciplined women. You've got women who just show that they emphasize that. I don't know if you've heard, you must have heard, but there's a saying that, you know, if you teach a woman, you know, you teach a nation, you teach the world.
Mm-hmm.
But if you teach a man, you know, it's like you're teaching an individual. It elevates the status of women. And for us to realize that, you know, if we have all of these women who, you know, they wanted to bring a change in society, you know, they influence society to achievement, to do good. When we have a role model like Fatima, like Sayyidah Fatima, why do we need to look at anybody else, you know? And infallible, you know? So, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. We have we have a few minutes left of the show. We have about 3 minutes left of the show. We've spoken a lot about the virtues of Fatima Zahra. How important is it that we do take lessons from her life? Because often we might hear people saying, you know, Fatima Zahra was so great and she was so amazing. And because in contrast, we're nowhere near her status, perhaps people feel not demoralized, but sometimes people give up even before they've started, or that's kind of their excuse for not looking to motivate themselves through Fatima Zahra. But I mean, this again, you know, you mentioned opportunities. This is an opportunity.
You know, something that really, really touched me. It was while I was in Iran, you know, I knew that the hawza I'm going to, it's called Jamiat Zahra, you know, it was known to be the house of Hazrat Zahra. And, you know, when somebody left, they would recite like Al-Wida Bayt Zahra, you know, we're saying Al-Wida to the house of Hazrat Zahra. You know, not just that, it brings about that whole, you know, responsibility that you're there. And not just that, you know, to see the shuhada from the Iran and Iraq war, you know, they would have like rams, as they would say, which is, you know, another word for like password, and like a key before they began the operation, you know, before it would all take place. And, you know, you'd see, it would say, the operation would begin with Ya Zahra. You know, the respect. Their last words were Ya Zahra. You know, that for them to realize that, you know, this is our mother, this is who we look up to. You know, it really touched me on how, you know, I felt like, why isn't my like key to things Ya Zahra? You know, I know there's like, you know, Allah, and then, you know, after Allah, but it doesn't mean that if you say Ya Zahra, you know, you're not respecting Allah, or you know, it's who He sent for us to follow, for us to be like, and inshallah we should aspire to be like her.
Incidentally, I just have to mention this because it's quite amazing that, you know, you're talking about keys and, you know, Fatima Zahra being the key to success. In one of the ziyarat of Fatima Zahra, if I'm not mistaken, we say Assalamu alayki ya miftah al-khairat, which is the key to
goodness.
So I just thought that was worth mentioning. We are drawing to the end of the show. It's been a wonderful show, and you know, I know we have Muharram, for example, we have Shahr Ramadan, we have all these kind of seasons throughout the year where there are opportunities to kind of focus on individuals. For example, Muharram is, you know, a great example where we focus so much on Imam Hussein, and we almost try and wring out every drop of knowledge and wisdom that we can. And personally, I feel like Fatimiyyah is a very neglected season, you could say, and perhaps not given the importance that it's due. So inshallah, this year we can all gain from the remembrance of Fatima Zahra and gain from the remembrance of her martyrdom. It's been a wonderful show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've learned so much, and, you know, I've got my notes here to prove it. Thank you to our viewers for watching. Inshallah, we will be back on Women's View next week as well. Same time, same place, 8 p.m. on a Thursday. So inshallah, we'll see you then. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.